3D Studio has many thousands of commands, and quite frankly, it can be a little overwhelming to learn all of them. The first thing I'd like to start with is touring the user interface to make you comfortable with the interface and how the menus work. The first menu to look at is called the menu bar. This is basically the pull-down menus that are at the top of the screen. If you click on any one of these, you'll see a whole series of commands related to that particular menu bar. We'll explore most of these later on in the course. Below the menu bar, you have what's called the menu toolbar, or the main toolbar. This is a toolbar that contains many icons of the most commonly used commands. One thing I'd like to point out about this menu bar is that it slides. So for instance, my screen is not big enough to show all of my menu toolbars. If you see the little hand here, you can click that and drag it to pan to see the remaining toolbars. So if your window is too small and you can't see all of the toolbars, just click your little hand and pan it to see the rest of them. You'll also notice that on these toolbars you have icons or tooltips behind each one of the icons. So if you just rest your cursor on that, you'll see the meaning of that particular icon or command. Another area of the screen to explore is called the control panel. This is somewhat new to an interface that many of you might not have used before. The control panel on the right side of the screen here has many different functions depending on what panel you pick. So for instance, the first panel here is the Create panel, which creates objects. If you click the next icon, that's the Modify panel, to modify objects after they're created. If you click on each one of these, you'll see that there are different functions for each one of these panels. We'll be exploring most of these later on in the course. So you can access these commands through the control panel, and we'll look at details of how they work later. Another general area of the screen is called the viewports. You'll see that this is the main area of your 3D Studio screen. One thing I'd like to point out here is that 3D Studio automatically divides your screen up into multiple viewports. That's because most of the time when you work in 3D Studio, you're working in 3D models, and it's easier to see the model working in multiple viewports. Later on, we'll look at controlling one viewport and also resizing the different viewports. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see an area called the status bar area. This will look at specific commands and also animation, and in the lower right corner, we'll look at ways to zoom and pan and control the display of your model. I'd like to now look at a few special controls which will help make the interface easier to use. The first control that I want to look at is in the control panel. If you click first of all on the Create panel, you'll see that you have first of all a number of different options to choose from here. So if you click on these different icons, these are different tools to create different things. For instance, if you wanted to create lights, you would pick on that. If you wanted to create cameras, you would pick on that. If you click on the first icon here, that creates geometry. If you click on the drop-down list, you'll see that you can create different kinds of geometry depending on what you pick in the drop-down list. If you click Standard Primitives, you're drawing standard primitives. If you click the drop-down list and pick Extended Primitives, that's what you're drawing. So not only do you have different options within the control panels, but then you have drop-down lists that also change the menus depending on what you pick. I'm going to go back and pick a standard primitive. One thing that you'll see in most of the control panel options is what we call a rollout. A rollout is a menu that can expand depending on how many options are in that particular menu. In this case, I'm looking at object types and I can see all of the different options within that menu. And this menu is already expanded. If you click the minus sign here, that compresses the menu so you don't see all of the options. Anytime that you see this plus sign, if you click on it, you'll see that the menu expands and you can see more options. So depending on where you are or what the command is, you might not see all the options. Just click the plus sign to expand everything. Some menus are too long to display on the side control panel. For instance, if you decide that you're going to draw a box and you click on Box, you'll see that some of the parameters aren't able to be displayed on the side of the control panel. Just like we had with our toolbars, you have a little hand that you can pan to see the rest of those commands. Notice here too that there's an option here called keyboard entry. I'm not seeing the different commands for that particular panel, but if I pick the plus sign, it expands it so I can see it. Again, the menu is too long now, so I need to use my hand to pan up or down to see the rest of those commands. So the control panel has many different options to it, and sometimes you're looking at too much information. You can always just click the minus sign to decompress that information, and then click the plus sign again to see more information. Another thing to point out here that's common to many of your commands is typing in an option or using what's called a spinner. So for instance, if we're drawing a box and we want to specify the size of the box, we can do that by using the keyboard entry. First of all, we can tell it the X, Y, and Z position, or the length, the width, and the height of the box. So for instance, if I just come here and type in my length, I could type in a 2, and the width I could type in a 4, and the height I could type in a 3. I'm typing those, or I can choose my spinner here to increase or decrease the size of what it is that I want to create. So you can either type or use the spinners anytime you want to enter a parameter. We'll come back and look at these in more detail when we actually add geometry. A few other things in the interface that I want to point out here is the use of the right mouse click. Many of the menus are what we call context-sensitive menus. For instance, if you come into any one of the 4 viewports and click with your right mouse button, you'll see that a series of commands will appear. Later on, when we put geometry into our models, we'll see that if we click on a piece of geometry and right-click, a different menu will appear. So we'll be coming back and visiting this context-sensitive menu with right-clicking on different areas of the menus. Lastly, I want to point out something that's probably already familiar to you, and that is looking at a flyout on a toolbar. You'll see that some of the toolbars on the toolbar menu have a little triangle in the lower right corner. If you click on that and hold, you'll see that there are different options to that particular command. So if you see a triangle, you can click and see what the different options are. So that's it for touring the user interface. You may want to take a few minutes now to just click on the different menus to get an idea of what's available on each one of them, and just get practice with moving over to the control panel, picking on the different icons, and seeing how they expand. Once you become comfortable with how this works in 3D Studio, you'll find it very useful to access the commands from many different areas. We'll be exploring all of these in detail later on.